Thanks everybody for joining us. We are going to explain what coin really is, demystify that, but we're going to do it in a really actionable way so that you guys can take it back and maybe even prototype or build this for your own organization.
When George and I present together, we like to do a more personal about us. We're in an increasingly remote and distributed world, and so please come up to us tomorrow, tonight, to talk about our talk or any personal connections. I'm Will. I'm a Senior Director of Engineering at Salesforce for the past 5 years, leading our cloud economics engineering team in both India and US. One of my favorite things about Salesforce is our 1-1-1 model. So I like to spend time volunteering at Glide Memorial Church, doing food services, a little bit of mentorship for my alma mater. And most of my free time that I spend in the Bay Area, I spend with my son, my cat, and out on the river deltas. And this is their AI representation as well.
My name is George Parker. Will and I work really closely together. I'm the Senior Director of Product Management for all the FinOps tooling as well as capacity and migration at Salesforce. We work together every day and build FinOps products at Salesforce. I live on the other side of the country, which can have its pros and cons. I have about 4.5 acres in North Carolina. I live there with my dog and my chickens. I love to ride motorcycles. I met the folks from Northwestern Mutual, and there's a bunch of riders in that group too. So come up and talk to us about our hobbies. Will mentioned the Salesforce 1-1-1 model. That's Salesforce gives back 1% of its product, its money, and its time every year. And we're going to talk a little bit about giving back to communities throughout this presentation. To talk about the technology for a second, Salesforce's cloud economics program was really born in 2020. Salesforce launched something called Hyperforce. That's our public cloud presence. We've been running in the cloud for a long time, pretty much as long as the company's been around. But Hyperforce is our cloud-native architecture that empowers customer agility, supports backwards compatibility, and helps our customers maintain all the custom apps and integrations they built over the last 20 years. When we pivoted to public cloud, that meant we needed to have a new approach to our FinOps tooling. And now that we're in public cloud, and every engineer can impact spending, we needed to think about how to match the budgets to the organic growth that was happening in these teams. Looking at the organic growth and all the new projects that were happening, it was difficult to understand where budgets were being used wisely and where there was a lot of room to optimize. So we needed a way to objectively compare these different teams and figure out who to give more money to. That's what COIN is really designed for. We've used this acronym COIN a couple times now. That's the Cost Optimization Index. This session builds on the work of those great folks that Joe mentioned. Builds on Joe's work, Dusty, Julia, Ursula, Audrea, and now Salesforce. At FinOpsX 2023 was the first time I'd come to this conference. I was sitting in this room, listening to this great presentation, texting Will, like, this is really cool, we should do this. We were eagerly waiting for that YouTube to come up. And when we didn't, we had to rely on our notes. And so Will's team took a prototype out of a hackathon, turned it into something that is a real product today, and we actually use this across Salesforce. One of the advantages of what we're doing here is the simplicity and clarity that it provides us to communicate across our organization. And it prompted us to pilot this in late 2023, fully implement it last year, and now scale it across 3,500 services roughly, across all of Salesforce with the President and Chief Engineering Officer's support. So our talk is going to dive into some of the details of how to do this, what it really is, how you can go back and build it, and some of the learnings that we took out of those first couple years. With that outline, I'll pass it to Will.
So we're really grateful to the FinOps community for helping develop this, and we've actually rolled this out to more than 15,000 engineers at Salesforce. So what's COIN? COIN is the Cost Optimization Index score, and it's a quantitative measure to assess your cost efficiency across anywhere in your cloud infrastructure. We're using two key components, a savings opportunity and a total cost that are both measured in dollars, and we take those and we create a ratio. We subtract that from 1 to make the higher scores kind of have a positive connotation. And once you have that normalized score, you can compare kind of any corner of your infrastructure and slice and dice. So we can compare the efficiency of 2 different services, maybe different regions, different environments, or even different cost centers or executives, organizations. At Salesforce, we really think about this as the inverse of waste. So, being a normalized score, this lends itself really well to a scoring methodology. So we range this from 0 to 100. an example score of 50, that would mean that your infrastructure in this area is about 50% cost efficient. A coin score of 85, it would be perceived that about 15% of your spend is waste. Now, on top of that, we can make this really visual and apply a red, yellow, green kind of common scoring methodology. What's great about this is that you can then align that sort of needs improvement and meets expectations to your organization's objectives and even change that over time. One thing that we've noticed is, this creates a little bit of gamification, some competitive nature between services and teams. But I think what's most interesting and fun is to see people kind of assess their own scores over time and compete against themselves to improve the coin score.
That top line, the opportunity, is really important here. Most of us know how to figure out total costs. The challenge is figuring out where all that savings opportunity is going to come from. Sometimes we'll call this campaigns interchangeably, but opportunities are potential for cost savings or optimizations in your infrastructure. Modeling these opportunities is pretty much the most important part of building your coin score. At Salesforce, we've modeled about 8 of these major opportunities so far, but the system scales with the addition or introduction of additional cost opportunities simply by adding them to that top line. So you've identified your total cost, that's what you're dividing by. This can be done at any scope. So whether it's your VP or your manager or your team or a single service or a region, you can use this model across all of your infrastructure and figure out where your efficiencies are. We then present this. For us, that's via Tableau, but your BI solution can work. We have a few favorite views that we tend to focus on in our organization. The first one here is just an overview. This gives us a distribution of where we are in the organization and the spread of inefficient to efficient. Teams can see this distribution of their scores across the infrastructure and compare other services or other BUs to their own. We also have a trend and a tree map view where teams drill into their own usage and see it evolving over time. A lot of teams want to watch the ebb and flow of these opportunities over time. They might have done a big initiative, a kind of a cost improvement exercise with their team, and they want to see that improvement directly in their score. As we have about 7 or 8 opportunities now, we also offer a tabular data view where teams can go dump that directly to their G Sheet or CSV as they see fit so that they can parse that data on their own. There's 2 other views that are not shown here that are relevant. We do have a view that we call Engineering 360. And that's a view for all the managers across our broad fleet to look at things like their agile health or their availability or their security scores, and we include this as part of that. So when somebody wants to go see, hey, how's a team doing, this cost efficiency is actually part of the holistic picture for managers. That's then included with budget owners as part of monthly budget reviews. And so when a budget owner says, hey, I need more money for that big project that I want to do next month, we can look at their coin score and say, hey, we can see that you're already using your budget about 80 or 90% efficiently. We do think you need probably more money. Or maybe on the flip side, they're coming in at a 30 or 40, and we're like, you could probably get by with the amount that you have if you would just spend it a little bit more wisely. So that's the first section of this presentation. That's what coin is. And just a reminder, so it's a quantitative measure of real dollars. We use that to track infrastructure efficiency. We use the red, yellow, green scoring to rate that result. And we're constantly maturing this coin score by adding new opportunities every release and presenting all that with Tableau dashboards to our executive and our service teams. Let's talk a little bit about how we build coin.
Yeah. So as a benchmark and a KPI, right, at coin's foundation is data. So we need 3 key data sources to power this. First is your total cost. That's going to come from your cloud service providers, billing data sets. I think it's probably the most simple portion of this. Second, you have a diverse set of data sources to power your cost opportunities. At Salesforce, we really focus on telemetry and monitoring data, mostly kind of resource utilization. But you could take cost optimization recommendations from third-party vendors, or maybe your cloud service provider's kind of optimization hub. I think the most important data source that Salesforce uses is this additional metadata and dimensions that map each service to our engineering leaders. So we call this our service registry, and that's how we map this up and down the organizational hierarchy, all the way from our president of engineering down to every single engineering manager. So With that, let's take a couple examples. In this case, I've got two different dimensions, one that represents maybe an engineering leader, another that is an environment, and a couple of cost opportunities here. So with Coin, I can then compare George's engineering leadership, his team's services, and Will's. And in this case, George has about $1,500 worth of cost opportunity savings possible against about $17,000 worth of spend in this time frame. This adds up to a great score of 92.5. If George were to ask for more funding, I would probably invest in him. Now, in comparison, Will has about $6,000 worth of savings kind of assessed against about $12,000 worth of spend. And so he has a Coin score of 7.5. What's great about this is you can then dive in and find optimizations. If George were to be still looking for more savings opportunities, he could break apart maybe his environments and see that the development environment is where he should be investing. So now that we have these three data sources available, first we build those cost opportunities, we calculate the Coin score, and then we add all that team metadata and finally visualize in Tableau, drinking our own champagne at Salesforce, but you could use any tool that you have access to here. What I think has worked best for Salesforce is my team actually already used these data sources for other purposes. For cost visibility, we needed the cloud billing data set. To understand our efficiency, we needed that observability data, and that service registry was powering some of our budgeting process. So an engineer on my team was able to prototype our first version of Coin in just 3 days in a hackathon, covering all of that Hyperforce infrastructure mentioned earlier. I think we could probably have even done this even on a smaller scale with a spreadsheet in less than a day.
So we've talked a little bit about that formula, that cost opportunity divided by your total cost. Let's talk about how we actually get those opportunities. There's some common patterns for these savings opportunities across the fleet. Waste elimination and resource optimization are the two that we target the most. These are easy, they're straightforward, they're well understood. I think there's vendors downstairs who have a list of about 500 of them. There's idle compute, right? That's a big one for all of us. How many people know that they have low CPU utilization in their fleet? If your hand's not up, probably should be. Orphan volumes is another one. Unused snapshots, and sometimes some avoidable fees, like migrating off of an old version. Sometimes a cloud provider will charge you a little extra if you haven't moved to the newest version. These are easy, straightforward savings that are coming from waste in your fleet. There's also some more complex ones slightly, resource optimization, things like turning on storage tiering, switching instances out for later generations where you get more performance. There is some right sizing in here. Those are the things that we like to target. There's a couple other ones I'll mention. They're a little bit more complicated, so maybe a little bit more advanced or more nuanced and take a little bit more caution. Rate optimization. So for some organizations, commitment use discounts or volume discounts, those might be handled in service teams. Some of your organizations are probably handling a lot of that centrally like we do. So this might be an area for you, might not. And there's also some architectural questions. One of the asks I've gotten about opportunities is like, hey, maybe we should assess an opportunity. If your CPU is low, maybe you should be using functions as a service instead, and you shouldn't be using VMs. So some of those re-architecting questions could be considered opportunities here as well. I don't want to dismiss those. They are a little bit more complex, and you might need to go actually work with some teams a little bit more hands-on. We tend to gravitate, for reasons we'll talk about later, for these top two, where it's a little bit more straightforward, and you can know across the fleet that you want to see CPU utilization go up without having to go talk to a team to figure that out. Let's look at some examples. Start with an easy one, storage. So migrating your storage volumes. This is a quote from one of our vendors, basically saying we can get a 20% reduction if we would upgrade the generation of our storage. So calculating the savings opportunity for this storage upgrade is relatively straightforward. You take the Gen 2 cost, you multiply it by 20%, that's how much you would save, according to the vendor, by moving to Gen 3. That gets added to that top line, that numerator in the formula we showed you earlier. Here's a little bit more complicated one. This is CPU utilization. We're continuously evolving. This is our largest opportunity. It continues to be our largest opportunity, and we continue to rethink and evolve how we're thinking about this problem. So we first needed to agree on a target CPU threshold. What we originally settled on was a P95 or 95th percentile of 35%. That means that for some 10, 15 minutes a day, you were running at 35%. We felt like that was pretty good. It's like a relatively low bar. You didn't have to hit it all the time. You don't have to peak there, every day. But we want to see sometimes that you're using at least about a third of your CPUs. That seems fair. Apparently wasn't. We're going to learn from that. This worked for about the first year, but eventually this actually came into collision with some of our business critical services. So most of you probably are familiar with some high availability architectures. Maybe you're running some active backup kind of situations where you've deployed 2 nodes and one of them is running idle. We actually have some 3-node architectures where people are running active, standby, and backup, and so you have 2 nodes that are idle and 1 that runs. You start looking at the CPU utilization and assessing opportunity off that P95, you might be assessing a pretty large opportunity against some of those idle nodes that need to stay there in that way intentionally. So what we're kind of rethinking on this one is to look at maybe P99 and to look at HA nodes in a little bit of a different way and track only the active nodes. The math here checks out. So if you take the cost of the compute and you're actually going to take that peak utilization and divide it by the target utilization, what you're effectively getting there is the slice of CPU between where you want people to be and where they are. We actually have an if statement at the beginning of that, if you're less than 35, because otherwise this math goes negative, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. But if you're looking at utilization, think about it in this frame and go, what is my target for my organization? And figure out, I think the demonstrable theme here is figure out how to reduce that to a dollar value. If you can figure out how much of CPU is getting thrown away every day, and you can quantify that in dollars, you can add it to that numerator again. One more, and this was my favorite one. It's a little bit more advanced, but I think it's a fun one. Way back in my background, I was a network engineer once upon a time. Will's team did something really cool. They actually dove into the IP flows, figured out where the private and public IP address ranges were, and now we're looking at all of the individual IP flows and saying, hey, you were actually trying to get to a private IP, but you went over an external gateway. That would have been a lot cheaper if you did it internally. So we're actually figuring out that dollar value cost. Here it's about a 75% cost efficiency, a 75% savings if you would redirect your traffic that's destined for an internal IP, if you would get it off of the external gateway and bring it internal. It's more secure and it's a whole lot cheaper. So we take your external network cost, the percentage of that traffic that we identified should have been or could have been internal, and 75% is that the dollar value we could have saved, and we add that to the numerator again. These are a few examples. We have plenty more. There's a whole logic to kind of how we've added these over time, and again, we're going to talk about that as well here. But these are just some examples to get you thinking about how you might take some known waste in your organization, reduce it to $1, and add it into this formula.
So as George mentioned, we started to add more and more of these cost opportunities, and what you might end up doing is having multiple cost opportunities that are targeting the same resource. Now, the problem is that with that is that you can't actually save that same dollar twice. So here we have an example. If I have, let's say, a underutilized instance that is, not covered, let's say, by a savings plan, but also needs to be right-sized, you would overestimate the savings here by about 20%. Instead, what we do at Salesforce is we apply a consistent kind of prioritization of these cost opportunities, and we assume that a team will first right-size their instance and then apply, let's say, a secondary or third cost opportunity after that. Now, at this point, we had a running coin score across Salesforce, and we started to get real user feedback. So we mentioned storage tiering before. We had a model for a cost opportunity that any storage that was beyond 30 days should be stored at a lower tier and thus create a cost opportunity. Now, in reality, there were enough teams across Salesforce that the log storage team came to us and said, hey, we actually don't store any data beyond 30 days. And so not only is this cost opportunity not existent, this would be charging us more money if we turned on this intelligent tiering optimization. So at that point, we realized we needed to build some more components to this and started to support exceptions. What was really important about this is that it was version controlled and audible in this central FinOps practice. And we stored mostly the requester, the approver, a justification, and expiration so that we go back in time, and when people came to us later, we could explain why we had allowed these exceptions. And we'll talk about some of that in our rollout process. So at this point, we have teams coming to us requesting exceptions, and so we needed to start restating past coin scores because these weren't actually real savings for them. The other thing we found is that every time you add a cost opportunity, you're actually going to lower your organization's coin scores. And so we needed to start to create a versioning so that people weren't chasing a moving target.
We also had a lot of people that wanted to understand the math behind what we were computing and calculating. If you just say, hey, you got a 75, you're gonna go, why did I get a 75 for? You wanna understand the nature of all the math that goes into this. We say, oh, well, you got the 75 because you have low CPU utilization. You're gonna say, but where's my low CPU utilization? There's a lot of deep dives into this data that are necessary, and so it's really recommended that you expose all of the details for this, not just that total score number. It's important, and it's the driving part of the conversation, but add to that the total cost that goes with it. Help them understand what that total savings opportunity. Then they can do the math on the formula itself. They can take that numerator divided by the denominator and then trust your math. Show them all of the different campaigns that you have or the opportunities that you have and the breakout to figure out how you got that total number for their savings opportunity. Help them understand the inputs that went into you calculating each of those individual opportunities so that they can go find the source of it and correct it there. That will build trust by showing all of those intermediate results.
And then at Salesforce scale, we started to find some edge cases in our original implementation. Most of these have to do with teams receiving credits. And so it wasn't actually true that a team would always have a total cost greater than 0. There were specific instances where they would have a negative cost, or in another case, have a total cost that was less than their total savings opportunity. In those cases, we actually had coin scores that were negative or above 100, and we had to start to design for credits in our cost opportunities and sort of clamp these scores for these edge cases.
So that's a little bit about what coin is and how to build it, how to take it back to your organization and do the math. Maybe you start out with a spreadsheet, maybe you start out with a POC or a hackathon. Let's talk about the keys to success and some of the learnings we had after we did that. We've been doing this about 18 months to 2 years now, and here's roughly what we found. Just from a general high-level strength and weaknesses perspective, this is a really great system. It's super intuitive, it's very simple, easy to explain, and the great part is it's actionable. You immediately know what to do next. You can give a team their score, and they know immediately how to prioritize those opportunities and say, oh, the biggest thing impacting me is this one right here. I'm gonna go chase that. I'll do a project about it next month. Seeing those red, yellow, green scores coming out of that, it's gonna drive that friendly competition. It's gonna drive the incentive and the motivation for your leaders to go chase those optimizations. At the same rate, there are some weaknesses. This is not a perfect system, but you can mitigate a lot of these weaknesses. It's imperfect, right? We've talked about some of the items like, logging. We needed an exception process. Some of the opportunities are subjective. We've obviously gone back to the well about the CPU utilization one, so there's some architectural alignment that you should have some discussions inside your organization about what targets to really set. It's also dependent on executive sponsorship, and we were really lucky there, but build the momentum in your organization around this. Don't just go off in a silo, build a pet project, and then come back. Start to think about how you would pitch this to your leadership. There was a really great chalk talk yesterday about like executive alignment and how to get executive buy-in. Attend one of those breakout sessions to help you think about that conversation that you need to have with your leadership to implement something like this successfully at your organization.
So thinking about that imperfect nature, we started off without any exception process, and we found a couple of patterns as teams and services started to come to us to request exceptions. Two of the most common patterns were, one, they were requesting exceptions mostly because it was a prioritization challenge for them. These service owners have other jobs. They're trying to deliver new features. They're trying to maintain their availability. They're trying to improve maybe their security vulnerabilities. And so for them at that time, these cost optimizations weren't a priority. In other cases, it was more of an education challenge. Maybe teams that were a little bit more abstracted from the infrastructure didn't understand, what their waste was, and so we needed to educate them along in that process. But as these manual exceptions kept coming in, we realized we needed to create a process around this. So the first thing we did was create a decision framework and have a justification for how we processed these exceptions. We focused on the technical merit. Basically, were these exception requests, were these cost opportunities valid? We did not allow people to have to remove coin opportunities just based off of their own prioritization. We built that with our users together, so we include architects both from our central team and the service owners to go through this process together, and then we documented it. One of my favorite kind of stories of how this played out was our Salesforce's database team came to us about their compute optimizations and said, hey, we're storage and IO bound. This is not really relevant to us. In fact, there's no instance types that kind of satisfy our exact needs. And so based on that collaboration between the architects and through this decision framework, we agreed. We said, we will give you an exception and remove that cost opportunity. Now, it was great that we documented that because a few weeks later, the search team came to us referencing that prior exception and said, hey, we would like the same one. This is fair. We should also be exempted. Well, we actually had the decision framework that this was about the technical merit, if it was feasible to make that optimization. And we asked the architect, are you, storage and IO bound? And because they weren't, it was a very easy conversation to essentially deny that exception request and keep pushing that culture of cost efficiency at Salesforce. George and I partner every day as engineering managers and product managers trying to prioritize all these different asks as service owners. When we started out, I think Coin's normalization doesn't really tell us a great job about how to prioritize. We weren't able to separate out kind of the value of what we needed to optimize from the effort. And so, as George was mentioning before, it's really important to expose that total cost opportunity because that directly highlights the value side of this equation. On the other hand, I would say there's still more to learn on the effort. We have a high-level sense of kind of the effort to improve these different opportunities, but that doesn't scale across, we'll say, every single service owner at Salesforce. And we're really interested to talk to us and share your ideas of how we could incorporate effort into the Coin score. I was just say, based on those learnings, the first year that we rolled out the Coin score, we weren't able to include it in Salesforce's OKRs at a kind of engineering-wide level. Once we started to hone in on this total cost opportunity as a sense of value, we were able to set those targets across teams and is now on our OKRs this year.
We talked a little bit about executive sponsorship. Roadshows and executive sponsorship is really critical to this being a success. It's a great model. It's a great data point. It's a great value add to your organization. It will be more successful if your executive leadership is on board. Quick prototypes go a long way. That was what helped us sell it to our organization. Focus on the explainability side and make it easy and accessible. One of the things I did was I just put a FAQ deck. Spoiler, there's actually no questions anywhere in the deck. It was just all the things that people had been asking me over the first couple months of us executing on this, that I just started writing down the answers and kind of preparing all the things that I knew that people would be asking at different points in time. And we took this to all the VPs and EVPs. We took it to our chief engineering officers directs. We went to their staff meetings, kind of pitched the idea, explained what we were doing, explained where to get the math and why this would help them get more budget next year, putting it in their language, their terminology, and helping them figure out what was in it for them. And what was in it for them was more money next year. Resist the temptation to make all your math formulas intimidating. It's really easy to hand this to somebody on a technical team and let them write the formulas in a kind of complex way with the Riemann sum figures, and that kind of puts off some of the audience. It looks intimidating or opaque. Make it easy. We show that in the graphics earlier in the deck. It's really just that savings opportunity divided by the total cost. Focus on the simplicity of what you're trying to accomplish here, and don't let the details get in the way of a good story. Build that FAQ, build that presentation, communicate all that stuff internally, but also be responsive. When people have questions, you want them to have trust. You want them to have confidence that you guys are on top of this, that you're paying attention to it, that you know the details, and that you can explain it to them anytime that they need. We talk a lot about internally, like kind of our brand of data competency as one of the key hallmarks of our team. And part of that is being able to explain our math, explain our numbers to people very readily, and helping them then teach the rest of their organization. There's many people within your organization who are going to act as levers for you to communicate this idea more broadly to their service teams. Maybe that's an engineering manager, maybe it's somebody in your finance team, but those right kind of communication contacts in your organization will help you disseminate that message. Find who they are and enable them, teach them the power of this story, and then they'll communicate that message deeper into your organization. We talked a little bit about opportunities and exceptions and the complexity around these. It is recommended to select your new opportunities carefully. I actually had somebody come up to me right before this talk and ask about an opportunity on one of their SaaS platforms. That's definitely something that you could be thinking about. This model works with a whole lot of different capabilities, not just your cloud provider. It's a relatively straightforward concept. But there's details when you go to pick those opportunities, there's things that you want to think about. One of those might be like, hey, how hard is this going to be to implement? What's the cost to me to actually go build this opportunity? Another version of that might be, how much money could we reasonably even save here? One of the ones that we were asked about sometime last year, we actually had a meeting to discuss the feasibility and like how hard is this going to be to do? And we realized in that call that the amount of money that we could even save if we implemented it was less than the money that it cost us to have that meeting, and we immediately threw that idea out. There's also the cost to remediate. There's the cost to fix it. If something's going to cost you a year worth of revenue to make a small tweak, it's probably not worth it either. So you got to be thinking kind of about these different characteristics of each of these opportunities before you just kind of run willy-nilly straight into implementing them. They might also be very controversial. Well, one of the examples here is ARM processors. Go into your engineering teams and say, we think everybody should rebase on ARM processors. See how well that goes. There's definitely some value and some effort involved in these, as Will was mentioning, and there's some trade-offs before deciding to adopt them. So be conscious of that and focus on the kind of the 80-20 part of that. Focus on the 80% where you feel like you can get most of the savings. I had a really good set of conversations earlier this week, and one of the takeaways that I had from these conversations is I think the total savings opportunity number needs to stay roughly flat. And here's why. This is kind of a crazy idea. If it's going up too fast, if you're adding campaigns or opportunities faster than your engineering organization can keep up, they're not keeping up. You're spending a bunch of cycles adding more opportunities that they're not able to chase. So you don't want that number going up too dramatically. And if anything, changing that number too often actually will distract them from what you're trying to accomplish. They're going to go, hey, this number's different every single day. How can I follow what my coin score is? You know, it changes literally day to day. You guys keep adding opportunities. We've actually made that conscious choice to slow down a little bit on adding more opportunities to give teams a chance to stabilize. Will mentioned it earlier, every time we add a new opportunity, scores go down. So we don't want to kind of keep thrashing the team, so we've kind of consciously decided that there's a reasonable pace that we can take here, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. But there's, on the other hand of that, if the number's going down too quickly, then teams obviously have extra velocity, right? That might be, they're running out of ways to save money, and you might want to think about more reconnaissance, more investment in this choice right here of selecting new opportunities to give them some additional opportunities, additional money that they could be finding to save. That release cadence is important. Don't be hesitant to make changes. If the numbers are wrong, if you've got a negative coin score, you should fix that pretty quickly. Like, that's building trust in your product, right? That's building the competency with the data that you want your customers internally to have. And when I say customer, I mean internal. I think we're all kind of focused on what I mean by internal customers there. Be responsive to that feedback and support. Help them feel supported in your organization. That you've built this thing, you're expecting them to hold themselves to it. They need to know that you've got their back. Draw a balance. Again, too quickly, they're not able to keep up. Too slowly, and they're running out of money to save. We've found about a 3 to 4 month cadence is probably good. Whether that's a release or a quarter, that's probably good. A year might be too slow, but monthly might be a little bit too quickly. Your mileage may vary. There's probably somebody in here who runs 1 week scrums or 1 week sprints and somebody else who runs 4 week. And that's totally cool. Every organization is a little different, but find your balance. When you do change it, communicate those changes openly and clearly. Let everybody know, why did your scores change? When it comes to changing, I think one thing we've also learned is keep a versioning system, and it's not just for your changes. We thought kind of originally when somebody said, hey, do you guys have a versioning system? We were like, oh yeah, we're adding new campaigns. We probably should have what your old score looked like. What we also found is that there's reorgs that are happening constantly throughout all of our teams. How many people have had a reorg in the last year, just out of curiosity? So when you're building a coin score for a VP who might not be here anymore, or his team shifted over here, you need to be able to understand and explain why that person's or that organization's scores have changed. Be able to look at those old versions and again, realize that most times when you add an opportunity, if not all of them, those scores are going to go down. Manage that release cadence and change management.
So when we rolled out Coin, there was a lot of, as we said, friendly competition, but at times, this is, we're talking about money here, it can be a little bit unfriendly. It can be a little bit of a pressured situation when we're focusing on the budget. And so one thing I think that really helped change some of the incentives and invite kind of new partners to us is to use not just sticks, but a carrot. And so taking that total cost opportunity, we partnered with our sustainability lead and our cloud service provider, and we're able to translate that cost opportunity based off of kind of carbon equivalents and then, in this case, equivalents in trees, and actually change the framing to more of a positive sentiment and show the equivalent trees sequestered if you were to make these cost optimizations.
So what's next? For one, we're adding more opportunities, more campaigns. We're doing that all the time.
We're expanding coverage to other infrastructure, like new acquisitions. I know Slack's in the room, and we're looking at a new cloud service provider to add to our belt.
We're also refining our exception review process, getting to another level of rigor, asking architects from the requesting business units to sign off on those changes when they ask for a request, or for an exception.
We're constantly updating our methodologies to kind of improve the accuracy of them. George mentioned earlier, especially the CPU utilization. We're looking at changing our percentiles to P99. We're looking at high availability architecture and how to incorporate that in that cost opportunity.
We're also focusing on unit costs. For the more mature teams that are really at high levels of efficiency, the rest of the organization might not have caught up with them yet. So unit costs are a really great way to dovetail that in and help them see their efficiency gains over time in a different lens.
And I think we've seen, at the conference today, we're shifting towards both FinOps for AI and also AI for FinOps. So we've started to develop some internal tooling to help teams optimize their coin scores with AI. And we also could think about what AI-related cost opportunities we might add in the future.
Thanks for sitting through this. At Salesforce, we do believe in that 1-1-1 model, and this has been an important way that Salesforce can give back to the FinOps community. We've learned a lot from it. We hope that you've learned a lot from FinOps and from FinOps X, from this talk. If you're interested in more, we didn't even mention it, I think we've published this coin score to the KPIs. I was on the KPI working group after the first time I came to FinOps X. And while we were preparing for this, it actually got published to the website. So the coin score is officially part of the FinOps asset library. Thank you to Joe, Ursula, Audrea, Dusty, Julia, and everybody that made this possible. We'd be happy to take some questions, but this is a really important way that we've been able to give back to the community. And we hope that you continue to stay engaged with FinOps, the foundation, the community, this conference, and even us. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Feel free to ask some questions, and we'd love to chat with you afterwards as well.
Thank you.
Awesome. Do we have any questions? Oh, hold on. That arm shot up.
Tripping was a good way to start.
Hello. Fun question. How have you approached gamification using the coin score? And is it as nightmarish as I anticipated to be?
I would say it's almost completely natural. If I gave everybody in here a number on an index card from 0 to 100 and colored it in red, yellow, or green, the people who had a card that was red would start getting a little nervous. It happens almost completely naturally. There is some optics and some personal optics that kind of gets into the play. That kind of leads to some rubbing of tires, if you will, where people were like, hey, why am I getting this score? What does this really mean? That's natural. I think that's part of why the executive roadshows and getting everybody on board, getting your sponsorship from the top down, letting everybody know that that index card, you should probably take it seriously because it's going to be on your performance review next time. That helps get everybody engaged. It's really not been nightmarish, I would say. There's definitely some natural things, but in general, I mean, those kind of leaders or any kind of leader in your organization should be familiar with having some kind of leading KPI. And this one's a really intuitive one. And if you do what Will was talking about in terms of tying it back to the environment, even the engineers will go, that's like 1 million trees if I just stop using the 64XL over there. That happens pretty naturally, so it's really not to be scary. I think it's actually really kind of a healthy thing, and most folks should be pretty comfortable with it.
I'll add that at Salesforce, we're balancing across all these other, functions of our service ownership. And so this is part of a suite for us, a part of a suite of KPIs along with availability, product delivery. And so that helps, I think, balance out some of the gamification aspect kind of on the positive side. And as George mentioned, bringing in that sustainability, I think also, kind of brings a different positive lens kind of to balance out some of the competition.
Thanks for the presentation. right sizing is one of the key opportunities that you consider when you're looking at CPU utilization, right? How about the memory?
That's a good question. The question I heard was, we're obviously focusing on CPU utilization. What about memory? Memory tends to be cheaper, and we have a lot of Java. And if you're not quite familiar with Java, anybody in the room, it tends to be really memory hungry. The heap just basically consumes whatever's available. So chasing memory utilization is a little bit more complex, and in the ROI for it's not quite there. We definitely are looking for right-sizing opportunities. If a team came in and said, I'm memory bound, my CPU is super low, we usually look and say, what kind of instance are you using? Most times, I would say 90% of the time, they're using a general purpose instance. And so we tell them, you could get that same instance with half as much CPU by just switching to a purpose-built one that's for a memory workload. So we do have those conversations. To date, we're not really tracking a memory utilization opportunity for the reasons I kind of just stated, but it's definitely something we're aware of. And there are some folks that are doing some stuff around like being able to get into the Java heap and figure out what's for garbage collection. There's some challenges there for some of these companies that are trying to do automatic optimization. I don't want to get into too much of the details of like how Kubernetes handles when you automatically resize to give it more, it's complicated, but we just haven't found the high ROI from chasing that opportunity, partly because we're a heavy Java shop.
Do you work like in advance with them to get them agree that this is the way I calculate the saving opportunity?
I'm sorry, could you restate? Did you hear?
No, could you?
Like,
Yeah.
do you work with those engineers like in advance before you publish the coin and tell them, okay, this is the way how I calculate the saving opportunity?
I think what I heard is, do we work with engineering teams in advance of releasing a cost opportunity?
Right. If you calculate the coin, you calculate the saving opportunity, they have to agree this is the right way to calculate.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a central team, we're partnering with partners all across, many of the different personas. We actually have a process for releasing for new cost opportunities where we define the methodology. We go kind of basically build a sandbox and look at who are the top teams that we're identifying that need to improve here. And we'll go bring them into the room and discuss and show them and ask them, do you agree with this? What kind of feedback do you have? For some cases, we're working with like shared platforms, maybe Kubernetes, George mentioned earlier. I think we talked about a networking architecture change. We'll bring in those platform services, kind of architects and leaders, and have them design it with us. In fact, I would say you could kind of intersource this and have other teams contribute cost opportunities to your kind of central coin score.
Thank you.
Just to add on to that too, it was actually really fun. We've been doing that process of kind of phased rollout, like talking to people before we get too ahead of ourselves since the very beginning. So the first time we actually really were getting ready to launch the production dashboard, we went and looked at who the really low services were with the really low coin scores. And we went and called one of them. And like me and Will were like hopping on the call. We were like kind of nervous a little bit because this was like a new thing that we were rolling out. And they had a really low score, and like they were super gracious. They're like, oh yeah, we're shutting that thing down. Like we've completely deprecated it. Yes, it's completely dead. So we actually felt really gratified that like the model was working, the math was working. But yes, definitely recommend you have kind of that phased rollout approach to make sure you got everybody on board before just thrashing teams.
Hi. How did you get the buy-in with your entire leadership to put weight behind this coin terminology?
Good question. Do you want to take that one?
I will say one thing is we actually one thing I would highlight is we tried other systems before. We had partnered with our cloud service provider, and they were just really complicated and hard to explain. And we've been looking for something like, how can we shift this to this culture of cost efficiency? We mentioned this major change to public cloud Hyperforce architecture, and Coin just really stood out to both us and our leadership team as soon as we presented it with the simplicity. And like we said, starting small, have a prototype. You can do this in a day, a few days, to show real data and start to build that momentum, I'd say incrementally. I don't know what else you would add.
I think having that kind of like pitch deck, like ready to go, even if it's just something quick to like just shoot people over when they ask you an email on Slack, answer their specific questions, and then all the details are in here, right? And start building the marketing material to go with it so that it kind of self-enables. Once you've given that presentation a couple of times and people have heard it, you'll find those people in the organization who are levers, and they'll continue to amplify your message throughout the organization. That really helps.
Hey everyone, producer Andrew here. Thank you so much for watching and for your support. For more FinOps X 2025 content, go check out our YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, and leave comments and questions for all of our wonderful speakers. We appreciate your support.